Mr. Chair. I speak in strong opposition to Mr. Jackson's amendment. As a proud graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point, and now having the privilege to represent the Academy in my district, I want to start by emphasizing and re-emphasizing many of the points that ranking member made on this subject. Respectfully, I want to just remind my colleague of the principles we all learned in taking our oath, our duty, our obligation to follow lawful orders. These were lawful orders made at the time. Orders were part of being a cadet, a midshipman, and ultimately a future commissioned officer. We're teaching these young future officers that they will have this tremendous authority and responsibility of giving orders and then essentially undercutting those principles. The practice of administering vaccines for the purpose of military readiness is far from new. George Washington required smallpox vaccinations for his soldiers during the Revolutionary War. What if those soldiers, at the beginning of our country's formation, proudly fighting for our freedom, had decided not to follow that lawful order? We can wonder what would be of our republic. This is about following the chain of command, whether you're responding to George Washington or to your commanding officer, and this is a central aspect of a soldier's duty. Finally, the Secretary of Defense already has the authority to exempt a former cadet or midshipman from repaying tuition and has exercised that authority in the 2 previous cases where this issue has been brought up. There are 2 cases at the Naval Academy. So I want to raise those points and ask my colleagues to vote in strong opposition to this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Gentleman, Mr. Gaetz is recognized.
I would simply observe that George Washington was also a believer in natural immunity. Where there are people who had smallpox and could demonstrate it, the readiness of the force was put above any type of mandate or requirement. Our Secretary of Defense currently doesn't seem to have that same belief, and the consequence has been devastating for our military. I'm voting for Mr. Jackson's amendment and all the amendments that allow for a reinstatement and additional remedies that we'll define here for our service members, because we're not a stronger military as a consequence of this vaccine mandate. When we've asked people in force posture hearings again and again before this committee, are we stronger without the hundreds of pilots, without the special operators, without the people in the Guard and the reserves that have been driven out? Time and again, they indicate the parts of our mission that suffer as a result of that. So this is about readiness, and it's about undoing the tremendous harm that's been done to these service members by a frankly, very ill-supported vaccine mandate. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The military could also be asked if they think a military is stronger if the service members think orders are optional. I think they would all be pretty unanimous in saying, no, if you can't have service members who are following orders, you are going to be decidedly weaker. Second, I want to emphasize the point that Mr. Ryan made. This affects, at the moment, exactly 2, as I understand it, Service Academy members, and in both instances, the Secretary of Defense has exercised their option to waive this requirement. So this is a solution in search of a problem. And then lastly, we don't really want to relitigate. We've had the last 2 years arguing over the COVID vaccine mandates, but it is absolutely undeniable that vaccination saved, I don't know, thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives worldwide, and reduced the spread of the disease. There is simply no debate that the vaccine had that impact. And that was the judgment that was made. And to the sponsor of this amendment's point, once the pandemic was done, it didn't make sense at that point to have the vaccine mandate. That's what I said last year. It's a rational approach. In the height of the pandemic, with everything that was going on, it made an enormous amount of sense to have the mandate. It was a carefully considered decision. And I think the most offensive thing about this debate is the implication that it was political. Believe me, the military didn't want to do this, all right? They didn't want to lose these service members and start an argument. But the science told them this was going to best protect the force. So they made that decision, and then a number of people ignored it. Not that many, actually. So they decided that there had to be consequences for ignoring that order. That's what they did. That's the way the military is supposed to run. When the circumstances changed, this committee in Congress recognized that, and we moved the mandate. But we can all agree that when we did that, the pandemic was done. It was an entirely different set of circumstances. As I said, this is really about, does this committee want to tell service members that they don't have to obey lawful orders? I don't think we should. So I oppose this amendment as well. I yield back.
Is there any further discussion? There's no further debate. Questions on the amendment offered by Mr. Jackson. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. Madam Chair, the ayes have it. All right. We will now consider log number 3276 by Mr. Mills. For what purpose? Yeah, a recorded vote is requested on Mr. Jackson's amendment, and it will be postponed. Now what? You're good. Okay. We will now consider log number 3276 by Mr. Mills. I reserve the right to object to this amendment. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to bring the amendment to the table, 3726. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first want to approach the fact that many of us could not have seen the foreseen circumstances which occurred when we did have the COVID outbreak. But I think it's arguable to say that in many ways it was handled very poorly when it came to our United States military and our armed forces. And as a result of that, we've seen an absolute purging of our United States military as a result of this, up to 8,600 to add into the already 25,000 deficit. My amendment would prevent the Department of Defense from forcing our service members who were unconstitutionally removed from the military to not have their actual signing bonuses be forced to be paid back. The idea that these members who signed up to actually serve our armed forces and not serve the political agendas of others are now being forced to pay back their signing bonuses is absolutely absurd. This amendment is necessary to prevent the Department of Defense from doubling down on their wrongful treatment of our service members and for those who declined the COVID vaccine. Service members were already wrongfully forced to take the vaccine, and then after they refused, was removed altogether. I look forward to bringing this up on the floor, and as a result of the scoring system, which is very unfortunate, I will have to withdraw the following amendment. With that, I yield back.
I think the gentleman from Florida, I strongly support his amendment, but we do have a scoring problem, so I appreciate his withdrawal of it. We will now consider amendment number 3557R1 by Mr. Gaetz. For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Will the clerk please distribute the amendment? Without objection, the reading of the amendments dispensed with. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida for the purpose of explaining his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we had the Secretary of Defense before us, I asked him whether or not he would be able to develop a plan to bring back to the committee so that we had active re-engagement and re-enlistment of those who were harmed by the vaccine mandate. He said he could write that plan, so this directs him to do that. That's the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any further discussion? Chair recognizes the ranking member.
Yes, same arguments we've had before. We'll not restate them. I urge opposition to the amendment.
Any further discussion? If there's no further discussion, questions on adoption of the amendment offered by Mr. Gaetz of Florida, so many as are in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Pending the chair, the ayes have it.